So Dwayne, thank you for organizing this. I appreciate it. I know our students do, so I appreciate the effort you went through. I'm happy to share, talk with you guys and just share my perspective. From all of us, you're just going to hear very personal. There's no hard rules. It's just going to be our own experience and what to take away from it, I think. What I'll just do is kind of set the tone, which is going to be initially darker, because I'm going to be realistic with everybody about the academic job market right now. But I'm also going to give you, I hope, what we find to be clear guidance about what you can do, given challenging circumstances and a really tough hiring environment. So not just because of the cancellation of lots of NSF grants and IH grants, our universities really struggling budgetarily right now to hire. But it's also because we are now well past the demographic cliff, which no one knows better about than Jack, to my right. We are seeing shrinking enrollments. We're going to see shrinking enrollments. And when you combine shrinking population with fewer international students coming into the United States, that means that there is just going to be less demand for faculty positions. It's just natural, right? We're also witnessing the reorientation of universities to more term contracts and temporary faculty hiring. And so it is very possible that, in 20 years, people like me, are going to be an endangered species effectively, where, the world in which, you have tenured contracts, with the university, plenty, and that's the norm, it might be irrelevant. I don't know, but the point is that it's a shifting environment. And that means it's going to be especially more competitive, even more than it already has been, to get an academic job. So what all that should mean for you is not, okay, just, fold up, and find another career. What it means is that you have to be very open-eyed, and transparent and fair, realistic with yourself about what is going to be required in order to find an academic opportunity. And it's not just in the United States, it's also abroad. It's a challenging and competitive environment, even if you're looking for jobs outside the US as well. So, being at Mason, you're going to be trained very well. However, that is not necessarily what everyone is going to be evaluating you on when you're going on the job market. In many ways, actually, because, just to give you some statistical backing here, something like around 90% of all jobs at the top, I believe it's 50 departments of political science in the United States, go to like 10 graduates from 10 universities. It's wild. Okay. So what is happening is that these universities are hiring on brand names, right? And they're not looking deep enough into CVs to recognize differences, or the differences on their CVs are not great enough to merit hiring from universities that are not in the top 10 or 20 departments. So this is daunting. This is going to be very hard. So what does this mean for you? There are three primary ways that you can distinguish yourself from the pack. And that's what you're going to have to do. If you're going to win in this competition, there are three key ways. The first is publish. Publish early, publish often, publish in high quality outlets. There was a period that predated me, probably predated, a lot of us. I don't know, maybe not Jack can tell you, but it was a period where you could just graduate from your PhD program, and that would be enough of a qualification to be hired. And ideally, you have like one publication that's on the way or something.
That predated me too.
Okay.
That actually goes back to the expansion of higher education in the 80s, 70s, really, 60s and 70s.
Progressively since then, it has become more competitive, which means that you need more publications.
That's 50 years ago.
Yeah, but it's been progressive since then, basically. And the PhD is never, going to be enough anymore. And it's really about what are you going to do? What can you show that you've done during the PhD, process? So much so that now it's becoming a norm to actually pursue postdoctoral fellowships, sometimes more than one. We have members of faculty who have had more than one. During a period, in order to sort of broaden, to get stuff out, exactly, to publish your way through it. And so, or you also have a lot of programs sheltering PhD students for an extra year or two, while they continue to publish. And again, this is all strategic because it's basically to show on your CV that you have publication potential because you already are getting publications. If these are co-authored, that's totally fine too. It just shows that you're proactive and your work is of publishable, peer-reviewed publishable quality. The second way you can distinguish yourself is with grants. Applying for money to support your research, because those are external validators of your ideas and the work that you're doing. And it signals to other faculties, to other departments, that your work is meritorious, even before it ever gets published. It's not really a substitute. You're going to have to do both, but it helps to have a grant for a future project and a publication that's already out to demonstrate that you have a pipeline. The third thing that you can pursue, again, as a hedge against these really challenging conditions, is to get recognition, which actually kind of goes hand in hand with research grants, but it's a little different. Best article awards, best paper awards, pre-doctoral fellowships. All of these are forms of recognition, usually peer-reviewed, that again distinguish you. And it gives these other departments a sense of validation that you are worthy of a job. And this is more important when you're coming from a university like Mason. If you're coming from, Jack guy's PhD at Harvard. If you're going up against someone who's coming from a PhD at Harvard, validation is still good, but they're going to get the benefit of the doubt, right? You're not going to get the benefit of the doubt. So let's just be straight about it. Get yourself validated with one of these kinds of awards that the PhDs from Harvard didn't get, and suddenly you look really attractive, right? Despite not having necessarily the name brand PhD behind you, right? Not being in one of those 10 departments that I mentioned earlier, right? So it's recognition, money, and publications. Those are the three things that you can do. Now, how you get there, of course, is going to be on you, right? It's going to be how hard you work, obviously, but also how smart you work. And I want to get to how smart you work, and then I'll conclude, because I assume you guys will have some questions as well. So how smart you work really is a matter of, and Sue has heard me talk about this, Sue's one of my students, is about how you curate and select the work that you do. And that is a function not only of what its potential is, and you have to be realistic about it. Just because you think it's going to be, a top 3 journal piece doesn't necessarily mean it will be, right? You need to have some kind of reassurances from your committee members, from others that this is a really big idea, that this is something you can do. Also something that's a feasibility question, right? Can you do it quickly enough, right? Or is this going to be like, an opus that's going to take 10 years to produce? The third thing about is also related to feasibility, which is, are you subject to circumstances beyond your control? I study immigration policy, okay? If I am dependent on admissions for a research project, I'm screwed right now because there are very few admissions coming into the United States right now, right? If I'm studying refugees and I'm concerned with pipeline, we have almost no pipeline of humanitarian migrants coming to the United States. So if I had a project that was reliant on that, I am completely screwed. So when you're planning your pipeline, you have to be smart in selecting really high potential projects that you can do in a certain amount of time, and ideally that are feasible with the data available for you to achieve them, right? When you think about potential, I like to use a baseball analogy, and I always ask my students, is this a single, a double, a triple, or a home run? If it is not a triple or a home run, I actually would question whether you should spend your time on it. Doubles are questionable, depends, right? Sometimes if it's really easy to produce the work and it's going to be in a solid subfield journal, then do it, right? But the problem is a lot of PhD students spin their wheels on singles, and they often take a lot of time to hit these singles. And it's not going to move the needle the way a triple or a home run will. And so you have to be smart about how you allocate your time. Otherwise, you really will feel a lot of pressure on you. Like, oh, the guest said it's really competitive. I need lots of publications. Honestly, if you can just have a couple really good quality publications that are done in time for your candidacy, then that is much better than lots of small ones, especially if those small ones have a risk of distracting you, tripping you up, being disruptive to the rest of your time. It needs to be it has to be commensurate with the potential, the amount of work that they require. And so that's the way I would recommend thinking about it. I'm promise you, I practice what I preach. It's the way I think about things. And it requires some brutality. It's required me to sometimes tell friends who want to work with me on a project that, I may not say this to them directly, that it's not a big enough idea, that doesn't have enough potential to merit my time, but I have to basically say no. And, it requires that kind of brutality and logic, think that way. And also it requires you to limit the things that you take on, in your life, just generally, like you only have a certain amount of time, you have to care for yourself, your mental well-being, wellness considerations, family obligations. Some of you may have part-time jobs, full-time jobs, all of these are considerations. And so you have to have these things in mind as you're making these decisions about how to allocate your time.
Now, what about teaching experience?
So teaching experience is really only going to be something that you want to accumulate if you are aiming for teaching universities that are going to be concerned with teaching. Many of you might be, and it's generally a good idea, Dwayne, I think, to have at least one course under your belt. At Mason, we don't have tons of opportunities for teaching your own course, but we do have some GTA teaching opportunities. I think it's a good idea. You really only need to check that box 1 or 2 times. I think that, for those of you, it's basically the marginal gain of the teaching experience drops dramatically after each time you teach. Because the departments just want, again, validation that you're good enough in the classroom, you have, you have solid evaluations. And by the way, I say this as someone who accumulated a lot of teaching before I got my tenure job. So I think it's a great question, but I think that you want to really check that box and move on, and really focus on the other things that are going to distinguish you. Because remember, lots of other candidates that you're going up against will have teaching experience. It's not sufficiently a differentiator. So you want to make sure that no one can say, we have no idea what this person's like in the classroom. We don't want that to happen, but that's not what you're going to hang your hat on. Even if you have like a teaching award behind you. This might be actually just to kind of, as an example of just how, challenging it can be. This is 12 years ago. I've been at Mason. This is my 12th year at Mason. 12 years ago, I was hired at Mason on a tenure line position. That was after 6 job cycles, 6 years of attempts at tenure line positions. So I started 2 years before I graduated from my PhD. I went to the London School of Economics. I came up empty-handed the first year. The second year I came up empty-handed, but I was lucky enough to score a postdoc at Harvard, but I got no tenure line positions. At Harvard, as a postdoc with a book in hand, I was rejected from tenure line positions year 3, 4, and 5, completely empty-handed. That was with the second book under contract, multiple articles already published.
You were able to keep your postdoc.
I was able to keep my postdoc. And actually, the only thing that let me keep my postdoc and extend it, because I had a 2-year postdoc, was my good teaching. So I taught well, so Harvard kept me around and made me a lecturer. So I was a lecturer. I was one of the, like Jack probably, I was like one of the few people that was actually affiliated between sociology and government, which is like notoriously rare apparently. But yes, and the only reason both departments wanted me was because I had very good teaching ratings. They didn't care at all about the books I had published or anything like that. They just wanted me to teach those classes. So it was hard. 200 applications, a lot of rejections.
That's very discouraging.
But you have to want it. You have to want it. And I think I still believe that it's worth it. And I really do believe it's worth it. But it really just takes a lot of work.
If I can add something more encouraging, one of my PhD students who did get a job at one of those top 50 departments in the International Studies School at Indiana University, which is one of the top international studies graduate programs. She got there by getting a postdoc. Didn't go directly from George Mason to Indiana. She got postdocs at Stanford. And let me also say that when you are on the job market, a lot of whether you succeed or not can be due to factors beyond your control. Departments for a while were looking for people with certain method skills. You either fit that box or you didn't. Then they were looking for people who worked on China because a lot of departments needed more expertise on China. This year, I'm told by people I know on the market that a lot of programs are looking for people with expertise on South Asia because they filled up their China stuff, but they realized they don't have anyone on India, Indonesia, Malaysia, Southeast Asia, and that's becoming more important. So the market has vagaries. And sometimes you have to be patient. This year isn't the year that people are looking for people in your field, but maybe next year will be. Or maybe certain universities are and others aren't. So you have to be open to the fact that you have to find your spot. And I've been at various times in my career, I've had lots of job interviews that did not result in anything other than rejection because I didn't fit the slot. And you just have to be persistent, keep going. But applying for postdocs now is one of the best strategies you can have. And one of the ways the student got postdocs is she identified prominent professors in her field, not here, but at other places like Hopkins or Columbia, and reached out to them even before she got her PhD and said, I'm doing work that I think might interest you. I'm sending you one of my articles that builds on your work. Faculty always like hearing that. And I hope you might find it interesting and contact me if you do. And because her work actually was interesting, she started to build relations with faculty elsewhere, which really helped when she applied to postdocs there. So you have to have, her dissertation wasn't huge. It was one of the smaller dissertations on my shelf. I was looking this morning, but she had some really smart articles that she was ready to send around even before she got the degree and while she was applying to postdoc. And that helped. Having something that is polished, that you can share, that you're proud of, and start to get your foot in the door, because it really is all about, getting attention.
Yeah, and actually Jack makes a really good addendum to what I was saying, which is the network. That is also something you can do in the meantime. It slips through your fingers because it's not concrete advice, because you're kind of shooting in the dark. You don't know if the faculty member who you befriended at Indiana University is going to be the faculty member that's on the search committee for the job you ultimately want. That's really not the way to think about how to network. The way you want to network is you cultivate relationships and mentorship outside of our department with others who are in a position to potentially endorse you in the future, share opportunities with you, connect you with people who are hubs and know lots of members in their subfield and who can connect you in the future. And I think recognizing, the extroverts in the subfield, people who are civically engaged in professional associations is a really good way of doing this.
I want to make sure that, because I think some of what we're leading to now goes to Dr. Victor and the application process. So I want to invite her to provide advice on that section. And I know that Dr. Victor, I can't recall if you're having to leave a little earlier, so I want to make sure you have your allotment of time.
Thanks. I'm happy to be here, happy to be included. This caught me at exactly the right time, kind of between things today. I will have a hard stop just a few minutes before 4, so I do hope to be able to answer some questions. But Justin and Jack have already covered a number of really excellent points. One thing I want to observe at the outset here is just not to be too obvious about it, but by having a panel of academics talk to you about what it takes to be a successful academic is a great lesson in how to perceive survivorship bias, right? So you're talking to the people who made it, you're talking to the people who have done it. This is like the classic World War II study where they wanted to know how to reinforce the airplanes when they came back from the field, and they looked at all the airplanes that had survived and where they had been shot up, and they reinforced those places, which was of course exactly the opposite logic of what they should have done, because the airplanes that had been shot in the other places did not come back at all. In any case, so with that caveat in mind, and thinking about how to access information from the non-survivors, as it were, one thing I would add along the lines of what Justin and Jack were describing is how to say this politely, like basically don't half-ass the academic goal. A lot of students I find in the Schar School come in to a PhD program and they're like, sure, I want an academic job, but I know it's competitive, so I'm going to leave all these other options open for non-academic or policy area jobs, whatever else. And they feel like that's sort of a no-brainer kind of attitude to take. And in a way it is. I completely get that. But one of the things I have found over the years with students who come in with that type of goal set is that the things that you have to do to become competitive in the academic market wind up getting not enough attention because you're sort of half-assing the academic part in favor of keeping the other options open. And so I want to emphasize that if you want the academic path to be an option for you, you have to do it all out. It has to be 100% all in on the academic path. And that means doing a lot of the things that Justin and Jack were just talking about. But it means, largely what it means is getting outside of your comfort zone a little bit, expanding your methodological toolkit. A lot of jobs these days wind up going to candidates with particular sets of methodological skills. So don't be afraid to get outside of your comfort zone and learn new statistical techniques or applications or, there's new tools being invented every day these days, and there's lots of ways to get to know them and to practice them and to put them into applications. And so I would definitely encourage that type of creative reaching. And then, of course, it's already been discussed, but I can't underscore enough the importance of working towards, if not successfully, getting publications on your record before applying for academic jobs. It's pretty tough to get an invite for a flyout or interview or whatnot with an academic record that includes 0 publications. It's not unheard of. But that doesn't mean you should take every seminar paper you've written and send it out to a journal tomorrow. That is also going to be a waste of your time, right? So one of the things that you definitely want to be incorporating into your overall strategy is mentorship. And I would say at the Schar School, we don't have a great formal mentorship program. Some places do. That's not necessarily a bad thing. I think a lot of really good mentorship happens in more an ad hoc or informal way. And you don't want to rely on one particular faculty member or be too dependent on some single person that's maybe very narrow. But having a few people who are faculty at different ranks, peers at different ranks, who can give you feedback on work. You should never be sending something to a journal that hasn't been read by peers or faculty mentors first, as with the standard or the rubric in mind of publication, right? When I'm reading a paper that somebody's submitted for a seminar assignment, I'm reading it with a very different rubric in mind than a paper that I'm reading as if I'm a reviewer for a journal. And you want that feedback, that reviewer style feedback. And so when you get that feedback from your peers and from faculty and can incorporate that into your work, then it will increase the probability of converting those into publications. And just being hyper-focused on figuring out how to prioritize that iterative process of writing and getting feedback and revising and getting work under review. It's sort of always looming there. There's nobody saying, here's the number one thing you have to do this week. Everybody lives busy lives. Everybody's got assignments and boxes to check and whatnot. But somehow getting that publication train continually moving is a necessity for thinking about the academic market. On the application process specifically, first thing I would say is, to the extent that it's feasible for you, apply really broadly. You've already heard some scary things about how competitive the academic market is. That is all largely true. Don't look at I mostly would pay attention to the APSA eJobs board, but people here are from different subfields, and so there are other eJob boards to pay attention to. I'm a political scientist, so that's the one that I would look at. The rule of thumb, though, is if you see a job where the job description vaguely seems like a good fit for you in terms of rank and substantive area, or whatever the main kind of criteria that they're looking for, if you fit those boxes, think about applying. You may be thinking, gosh, I don't really want to live in, Missoula or Urbana-Champaign or whatever. And I would just say, don't reject them. Let them reject you. Because every opportunity to interact with other schools, to get interview experience, whether that's maybe it's a phone interview experience, a flyout experience, maybe you get to the point where you get a job offer from a school that's just in a geographic location that you or your family cannot manage. Better to be in a position to have to turn that down than to not have tried for it at all, because going through that process will be hugely valuable experience about how to be successful on the market. It is a lot of work to apply to jobs and to keep track of everything. And the academic, both the application process and the interview process, it just requires an enormous amount of energy and resources of all kinds. And so, it's basically a part-time job to be doing that. So if you are on the market, you want to figure out how to budget your time so that you can set aside your writing time, but then also your time to manage all of this stuff. In your application materials, particularly your cover letter, you really want to primarily highlight the contributions that your research makes to the subfields that you're speaking to in your work. You don't want those to be too much of a personal narrative about here's why I got into this and here's why this is meaningful to me. And, here, let me retell you about all these things you can read on my CV and tell you about my experiences and my resume. That's not what the cover letter is for. The cover letter is for you to, in a compelling way, describe the contributions, theoretical, substantive, methodological, whatever, the contributions that your research makes to the various subfields that it is relevant for. And getting the practice at articulating that both verbally and in writing is going to be really key. Another thing that I would advise, and then the other things that were on my list have already been mentioned, so I'll leave it. But so I guess one of the last things I'll say is job ads almost never ask for this, but if you are an ABD, an all but dissertation student on the market, then I would strongly recommend you add it, even if they're not requesting it. And that is an annotated table of contents of your dissertation. If I'm reading a job file for a candidate who does not yet have a dissertation that is completed or defended, and they're saying that they will have one, then what I really want to know is I want really strong signals about the status of the project. So giving me an abstract, a short abstract of the dissertation and a list of the chapters, exactly what each chapter is intended to do and what its status is. It's completed, it's in progress, it's not started, whatever, like that style. No more than like maybe it's a page and a half, but if you could get it in one page, that would be great. But that type of summary document is going to be really a strong signal and a very helpful thing for committee members to have in front of them as they're comparing your file to potentially other ABDs or other candidates. And I will pass the mic on that.
Thank you, Dr. Victor. Now we'll have Dr. Goldstone talk about developing a research agenda.
Now, developing your research agenda is something you should have already started, right, with your PhD. But I'm going to pick up, once you are in a position where you've got your dissertation framed and near completion, what comes next? You need to have a two-track research plan if you're going to succeed in academia. And by that, I mean, you need to have a plan for what can you publish or submit for publication in the next 3 years. And what do you aim to have accomplished in terms of publications over the next 8 to 10 years? Now, you might say, that's looking pretty far ahead. I'm going to face a review after 3 years. I'm going to come up for tenure after 7. Yes, but when you come up for tenure, if you have a tenure track position, you're going to be evaluated on your trajectory, on what are you going to produce next if we give you tenure. The worst thing for people who come up for tenure is they have kind of exhausted whatever research topic they had and they're not clear about what comes next. So you want to have a research project that's pretty well completed, that shows what you've done. It might be a series of articles, it might be a book, but that has to lead somewhere. You're going to have to be able to articulate what comes next in your career after that first book or after that first half dozen articles, both to give you continued excitement and motivation, but also so that people evaluating you say, they didn't just turn their dissertation into a book and then that was their one big idea. You want to be seen as someone who is at the beginning of a productive career. Now, as I say, it may seem like that's a lot to deal with, but for your own sake, you want to be thinking about what interests you, what questions you have, what puzzles you want to solve. And your priority has to be, what can I get into publishable form in the next 3 years? But I think all of us have kind of to-do lists, where some of those to-do lists are, this is what I need to do this week, this is what I need to do by the end of next month, this is what I need to do by the end of the academic year, and these are my thoughts about what I'll do after that. Now, you're going to be revising, by the end of that year, you may have different plans, but you want to have a current major project that is a productive research line, and you at least want to have some ideas about where you go after that. So the dissertation needs to be your first good research project, definitely not your last, or you will be in trouble trying to get ahead in this world. And just as Justin pointed out, the accomplishments you need to be successful in the job market as a new PhD have risen a lot in the last 20, 30 years. So much so that many of us look and say, gee, I would have gotten a job based on where I was in graduate school if I came out today. But it's also true the bar has been rising on tenure. A lot of places that used to say, all you need is 3 articles in peer-reviewed journals have now gone up to say, no. To get tenure, you need to have a dozen. Or if you're writing a book, you need to have not just one published book, but you need to have a published book and at least a contract for a second book. And it's just the nature of how talented people are and how much they've already accomplished by the time they start their first job that has been raising the bar, right?
I think it's also a product of technology.
Yeah.
That we're able to access so much more data than we used to be and analyze it quickly. But no doubt Jack's right about the competitive nature of it. One thing I might add, Jack, if it's okay, is if you're wondering, like, how am I going to create this 8 to 10 year sustainable agenda, rather than looking at, like, we talked about singles and doubles, the space for home runs is so much more available if you're going into greener pastures. If there is a dense literature that is just 500 sources long and the canon is just huge, you're not going to find green pasture space there for you to hit home runs into, right? I think that inadvertently, no one gave me the advice to do this, but when I started studying immigration politics, it was an incredibly small field compared to where it's ballooned to now. This is one of the fastest growing subfields over the last 15 years of any in the social sciences, across economics, sociology, and politics. But it really would have been smart advice if someone had given it to me when I was in your stage, because there was so many green spaces. I remember my 2018 book with Anna Boucher. We looked at typologies of immigration regimes, and it was kind of stunning that no one had done this before. And the only reason we were able to do this was because it was green pastures. There just wasn't enough, there weren't enough people out there. It wasn't that we were smarter than anyone else, we just got there first, right? And so if you can identify what is next, what is the space that we haven't looked at, and where there's just 1,000 flowers blossoming, go to that space and it'll really sustain you longer, rather than trying to eke your way in and, like, get some elbow room in a really crowded room.
Well, let me build on what Justin said. I think he's right. The way I would tell you is to think about that longer term trajectory and build a research plan. There are 2 ways to go about it. One is to just sit down and make a list of puzzles or questions that you're interested in, right? Because if you're going to build a career, you have to be interested in what you're doing and sell it to other people. And, periodically go back, and as you learn more and more, ask yourself, which of these questions are really fresh and have a lot of potential? And which do I think, it looks like other people are working on that and being answered at. Figure out what you want to be known for. What is your claim to recognition? What are you doing that's special that makes you and your work valuable compared to other people in the field? It might be a method. It might be a data set. It might be a question. And if you can, find or generate original data that other people haven't analyzed, and some of it can be very simple. And I just read a book, came out 2022, on protest duration as an independent variable, looking at how does duration of protest episodes affect the probability of stable democracy. Now, that seems like a ridiculously simple question, but no one had answered it because there wasn't systematic cross-national data on protest duration. Now, that kind of data was generated about 8 to 10 years ago in the NAVCO data set and VDEM data set. But when a new data set like that is produced, you can start answering questions that people might have had for a while, but no one else has tackled it. And so if you can, identify a data set that's coming out in your field or see what people have done with it, that's an opportunity to generate several papers, just being able to get to know that data set better and before other people get to know that data. Part of what Justin has said is true, that if you can identify a field that looks like it'll have, power in the future, but is not yet fully developed, that's great. But it's also the case that a lot of fields that are pretty well developed get stagnant or stuck, where people kind of are analyzing the same data or asking the same question. And if you can kind of say, I think, we should approach this with different data, or approach it with cases that no one has looked at before, you can make a niche for yourself. One of our faculty is working on climate-induced migration. We didn't have a lot of data that was specific enough on climate events and migration outcomes to do that work, but lately it's been available, and that person's been able to build a reputation as a specialist in that area. So I think it's what's really important is to know the field in which you want to make a contribution. I had a professor say to me in grad school, before I publish a paper, I know the literature in that field like the back of my hand. And that was actually very useful advice. You need to know what has been said and whether, there's been so much said on that, I better look elsewhere. Or these people are saying the same things over and over, and they're missing this aspect. For example, migration. There was an enormous amount of work on number of migrants coming into the United States year by year. You had all kinds of experts on the border, on Hispanic migration, but there was very little work on how national government policies differed and their impact on migration. So this kind of migration regimes was a different area. People had not comparatively studied how government shapes migration. They basically looked at kind of from the level of the migrants themselves. Why are they moving? How many are coming in? Where are they landing? What's their impact on the labor market? And it looked very different when you kind of shift and say, okay, how does government policy differ among countries? It was kind of assumed that, migrants move because they're motivated to move and they take advantage of job opportunities. And, there's a lot written on the US and on the southern border, but it turns out that a lot of different countries had similar issues, but they didn't all approach it the same way. And then, saying which migration policies are more effective in pursuing national goals turns out, a lot of countries really want to know answers to that. And it's very productive. But there are other ways to spin this. I'm, looking now at, responses to migration. And a lot of people have done work on why people like migration, why people don't, but they haven't looked at the impact of surges of migration. They just ask people, are you in favor of migration or are you against it? And how does that vary with cycles in the economy? But it turns out it's actually most sensitive to surges, particularly surges of asylum seekers that get a lot of publicity. Even though asylum seekers are only about 5% of the volume of migrants, they turn out to have a totally disproportionate impact on popular perception of migration. And so it turns out you can't get good migration policy to deal with the 90% of economic migrants who are very important and who dominate until you deal with the emotional response to the small number of asylum seekers who tend to come in surges when there's a war or other crisis. So even, there are topics that are much examined, but if everybody's asking the same question, like what's the labor market impact of migrants, that gets exhausted. And then you look for other things. What's the impact of migration on entrepreneurship? What's the impact of unskilled versus skilled migrants on perceptions of migration? So it's amazing kind of once you say, you got to think outside the box. You got to start asking your own questions about your case. Then you can build a research trajectory for yourself. But again, it's important to really emphasize quality of your publications matters. I unfortunately had a PhD student at Davis who was really desperate to get a job. And so he published in the student journal. He published in any journal that would kind of had a high success rate in publications. And he ended up with a long list of publications, none of which were in top tier journals. And he got a job at Berkeley as a lecturer. He was a very good teacher, but he ended up getting stuck there. He kind of got stuck as a term contract teacher. He was always trying to get a tenure track job somewhere and never got it. And he ended up relying on his teaching ability to get reappointed as a lecturer. But those publications in second and third tier journals did not get him where he wanted to go. And you can say, it's great, he got a job at Berkeley. Yes, but it's not a job that pays well. It's not a job that's secure. And it's not a job that gave him the sense of self-worth that he thought he had as a researcher in that career ahead of him. Now that's okay, because a lot of people, he's gifted as a teacher, and he learned to find self-worth in that. He had to kind of rethink his career goals and what he was doing, and he kind of then leaned into what he was getting rewarded for. So I'm not going to downplay that. The tendency in the academic world is now to look for good teachers who are willing to teach 2-2, 3-3, 4-4 loads. And those people are actually doing better at getting jobs now than someone who says, I only want to be a researcher at a top 50 university. That's a bar that very few people are going to cross from no fault of their own, just because there are so few positions there. But if you have a research trajectory, the way to get it in the right direction is to aim for competitive journals. And fewer articles, 1 or 2 articles in refereed top tier journals will do more for your career than a bunch of things that are not at the top. Now, it takes a lot of work. And don't get upset if you're rejected the first time, right? You apply, you send an article to APSR, gets rejected. It's okay, there's AJPS, there's international organization, there's Journal of Peace operation. There's more than one.
I'm going to go on a limb, and I'm going to say the 4 of us on this panel are rejected 2 to 1. So that means for every one time we get something accepted, we're rejected twice. Is that fair?
I'm more 1 to 1.
Is that fair?
No, I'm more 1 to 1.
You're 1 to 1. Oh, you're showing off. I can guarantee you I'm 2 to 1. And especially if you factor in fellowships, grants, all that stuff, super competitive. If you're 1 for 1, you're like Hall of Fame. I'm telling you.
Jobs I'm 1 for 2.
That's a really high batting average. Okay. And don't forget, I got rejected by 204 something universities. So,
but what Jennifer said is right. One of the reasons that about half of my articles get accepted the first time, or they usually get accepted the second time, is I get a lot of help before I submit. So I draft an article, I send it to colleagues or friends for advice. I revise it, I look at it again myself and think what's wrong with this, and revise it again. By the time I send it out, I want to make sure that I've written something that I think is good, but I've anticipated the points where people might attack it.
And even then you're going to get rejected.
Absolutely. But if you keep it down to 1 out of 2 or 1 out of 3, that's tolerable. You don't want to get rejected 5 out of 6, then you're doing something not
But
right.
Jack, this is also a good point, right? Those rejections cost you time, right? It takes 6 months on average to get a rejection, right? So if you want to have publications in time for the job cycle, sometimes it's 4, maybe you're lucky it's 3. But if you want to get publications out, you need to be submitting well in advance of your graduation date so that these
And
things.
you want to be working on more than one item at once.
Yeah.
That's what, to give yourself the best chances, you want to be trying to put 2 or 3 things together that you can submit for journals within the same 1 or 2 year period. And you have, but like I say, I tell people all the time, you know, if you run a race in the Olympics and you come in 2nd or 3rd, you don't get another chance for 4 years. Right? That's it. But if you submit a journal article and it gets rejected, you can turn around the next day and try again. Now, it shouldn't be the next day. You should look at the comments carefully. You should see what went wrong and revise to prevent being rejected on those grounds again. So realistically, you should take 6 or 8 weeks to make sure you improve it. But the point is, you can keep trying. Being rejected doesn't mean that you have not, you know, that you've lost your opportunity. And as I say, you make a list of the top 4, 5, 6 journals in the field to which you're submitting. Make sure that you cite articles from those journals in the paper that you're submitting. If you have it, you're not paying attention to the literature or you're not submitting to the right journals, because journals like to see work that builds on work that they've published. But again, your research trajectory should be one of working on several articles or thinking about your first book as this is going to make my reputation in a field in which I hope I can keep working and have other ideas for what I'll do beyond that. Almost everybody, by the time they have submitted their first book to a publisher, that is, they've, you know, got the manuscript done, they've got to the point where all that remains is dealing with the reviews, copy editing, and so on. At that point, they're already thinking about their next book. They're thinking about what research needs to be done, what data do they look for, what further contribution is that next book going to make? Or if you're not a book field, you know, by the time you've done 5 or 6 articles that are somehow related, you're thinking about what else will generate a cluster of good leading articles for me.
So if I could expand on the things that you have both said. So a colleague of mine introduced me to the concept of merging. You do one research project and you get multiple publications out of it. So your dissertation is the most obvious one where you can pull out a chapter and your intro, your lit review, maybe some of your plus recommendations, and that is a journal article. Or if you're writing something that you're going to publish as a peer-reviewed article, you can also spin off a shorter version that's for a lay publication, right? Which won't count for academically, right? But it still looks good on the CV and it shows that, yes, you can communicate your complex ideas in a more accessible way. So there are ways to take one research project and get multiple publications out of them. And that's, you know, that adds to your efficiency.
Last thing I'll say, that's absolutely true. You need that efficiency these days. The last thing I'll say is try and think of a research plan that will keep you excited and engaged. It's something where you say, if I can answer this question, or if I can get to this result, or if I can really get data on this case, I'll be excited. That I don't think anyone has done this the right way. And I will be really excited if I can get this thing done, because research can be exhausting. It can be frustrating. There are times where it will not be fun to keep going over your work or dealing with rejection. And in order to keep yourself going, and you will have to be working 40, 50, 60 hours a week at some points, you're going to need to have a goal that excites you. And make sure you have that in mind when you're laying out your lifetime research plan.
And the point you made about having a list of things you want to work on. I still have a list in grad school, a Word document that I've literally maintained since 20 years now from grad school. And I will go back and revisit it and say, oh, is there something here that is now worth writing? Or I'll take things off the list because I read some great book or article that already did it. And it's a living document, and I have pulled things off of it to use either in class or try and write something. But the ideas you have now, like write them down. Like they're worth holding on to. Can we talk about interviewing?
Yes, so now Dr. Koglentz with interviewing.
So I guess I think the primary, interview you have to worry about is the job talk, right? If you are survive the gauntlet of applications and you get invited to, give a job talk, right? That is typically the major, the last major hurdle you're going to have for trying to get a job in the academic market. One thing to note is if you do get invited for a job talk, you've made it 90% of the way through the process. So you should look at it. Do not have imposter syndrome, right? Do not think, oh, I shouldn't be here. Like you've beat the other 100 and 200 people who've applied to get to the final round. So that's a huge achievement in of itself. So you should go in with confidence, right? Not go in thinking I don't belong here, right? So it's not the case. Otherwise, they would not have brought you in at that point. Right, job talks are almost always based on your dissertation, because that is the biggest body of work you've done. Every now and then I've heard someone do an article, but that's usually there's some special reason, like it's a super hot topic or there's something about it that resonates with that particular, faculty or whatnot. But basically you have to assume you're going to be presenting your dissertation. The job talk though is not a data dump, right? It's not a lecture. It's not, yes, there needs to be a structure to it, but it's not just kind of here's the facts and then that's it. You want to, when people are listening to your job talk, they're also looking at you in terms of not just, do you know your stuff? Can you explain it well? They're also looking at you saying, do I want to be in a faculty meeting with this person every month for the next however many years, right? Do I want this person teaching my students? So they're also looking for your personality. When you do the talk, right, again, obviously you have to be professional, but you also want to be engaging, right? You want to show some personality. If you start with icebreakers or story, make it into a story, it's something that gives you something beyond just, here's my theory, here's my methods, here's my cases, here's my conclusions, right? You want to give them something more. You should also be prepared to, there'll be people who do not come to your job talk for whatever reason. Right? They can't come, but they'll grab you afterwards and say, hey, what's your dissertation on? You need to also be ready with like a 1 minute or 30-second elevator pitch where you can succinctly summarize your dissertation. And even though you've spent the last X many years working on it and you've read 150 pages, I know lots of PhD students who still could not explain their dissertation in less than 30 seconds, right? That's not good. You need to be able to explain it. Maybe you don't go into all the complexities, but you need to have a very simple story to tell about your dissertation for someone who missed it, or even someone who's not in your field at all, right? You will be, if you're interviewing at a department of political science or public policy or whatever, you'll have people from lots of different subfields. There will be some people there who will know what you're working on, other people there who have no clue whatsoever. And you have to be gearing your job talk to address both audiences. So you should assume your audience is smart, but not experts, right? So don't use acronyms, minimize the jargon, practice ahead of time with your peers, but also practice with your family and friends who have no idea what you're talking about. And just, am I being clear? Does this make sense? Even if they can't follow the logic in the cases or whatever, like you should still be able to present well to people who just don't have any familiarity with IPE or international security or whatever your subfield is. You also want to do your homework when you're presenting. If you're going to the Schar to do a job talk and your topic is immigration, you better know what Justin's written about immigration, right? If you're writing about demographics, revolution, right, you need to know what Jack Goldstone has written about.
I wouldn't be so petty, but lots of people would be.
No. But even not in a petty way, like you want to walk in aware of that information, right? You just want to aware, right? And even if you might totally disagree with Justin, that's fine.
When they're too aware of my work, I know it's artificial. But if they're slightly aware, I'm like, okay, that's genuine.
So you just want to know. You want to do some research on the department, on the degrees they offer, because also they're thinking about you as not just an expert in whatever you're doing. They're thinking about, okay, what classes can we make this person teach, right? And so if they have a big program in IPE, what can you do to show that, yeah, you've got some understanding there, you have some contribution you can make there in terms of teaching. So you want to do your homework when you walk into these things. You want to know both the faculty, the programs, the kind of students, the kind of school it is. This will just make you better prepared And that will also let you anticipate questions you might get, either about your talk itself, or people might just say, so, what have you taught, or what have you TA'd? What would you like to teach? Right? And the answer is, you will teach whatever they want. If they want you to teach a class on,
Underwater basket weaving.
yes, you say, yes, I'd love to teach that.
I've always wanted to prep that. I haven't studied it before, but it's fascinated me for years.
Yes, the answer is always yes. And then you teach it once and you're trying to get out of it, but you have to be prepared to teach basically whatever they want, because especially as a newly minted PhD student, they're looking at you as, okay, you're gonna teach this stuff that no one wants to teach or whatever. So you have to be very open to all the opportunities that they present.
The Schar School hired me to teach Public Policy 500, right? And I've never taught public policy in my entire life. I don't have a degree in public policy, but that was the line in which I was hired. And they're like, you understand that you're gonna be required to teach this course. I'm like, I cannot to teach this course. And then the fools hired me, and it was wonderful. And actually, I continue to teach that course 12 years in. I continue to teach that course, not out of a sense of obligation. I actually love that course. It's really, I love teaching that course. I even wrote a text for that course. So like, I adopted it. So it's not like a life sentence if you don't want it to be, but it can be a nice one. Yeah.
So in addition to the job talk, you will also be taken out for lunch and for dinner. They'll have meetings set up with other faculty. They might also be meeting with students. So you should think about the kind of questions they'll be asking you, right? So again, for the people who did not go to your job talk, they'll say, so what's your dissertation on, or what are you working on? Again, you need to have that elevator pitch. They'll also want to know, what's your next project? Going to Jack's point of that they want to know you as your director. So you need to be prepared to say, yes, here's the 2 or 3 things I want to work on next. And they need to be developed enough that you can kind of communicate it, right? You don't need the whole table of contents for your next book project, but you need to say, I want to work on, South Korea's desire for nuclear weapons in a post-Cold War world, or whatever it is. You need to talk, teaching experience, what you've done as a TA. You need to be able to talk about your teaching style, teaching methods, your methodologies, either stuff you have showcased in your dissertation, things you've done in articles, or just other methods that you've learned, but you haven't had a chance to put in practice. But you need to show them that you are a well-rounded, methodologically inquisitive person, right? And so again, if they want to tell you you have to teach stats, yes, love stats, happen. Teach it, no problem. Even though you have to go, watch a bunch of YouTube videos about stats to actually do it. That's fine. But also they also will want to know, okay, so here's the things we want you to teach. And they'll say, okay, if you're lucky, they'll say, okay, well, you get to choose 1 or 2 classes. What do you want to teach? So then you have to think about, okay, again, this is why you need to know where you've applied. So if you already have a class on immigration, right? You don't say you want to teach immigration because you'll be getting Justin's class later. You say, I want to, look at,
Shaving beavers in Canada, 19th century.
a little more.
Oh, sorry.
But basically, you want
Illicit trade policy.
fine, yes, illicit trade, right? So, the political economy of forced labor, right? So it's adjacent. It's not immigration, but it's adjacent. So you want to be prepared with classes that you really actually do want to teach and you can teach, and things that ideally they don't offer, because then you are bringing something to the school that they don't have. And so again, that gives them another reason to hire you, as opposed to some random schmo from Harvard who can only teach the basic IR, comparative politics, whatever, but you've got something new and unique and interesting to offer.
Sometimes they're looking to deepen an area of interest, but they don't want you to cannibalize on what they already offer.
Exactly.
That's it.
Yeah. So doing your homework really matters for this, and people can tell when you haven't done your homework. I've been in lots of positions where someone comes in, they give a talk, and I'm like, what are you talking about? Why are you? It's just they seem totally disconnected from the position that's been advertised, from the job they're going to have, and it's obviously they didn't do any research into what Mason is or what the Schar School is or this program, and it shows, right? And that is a bad look, right? If you don't do your homework, if you look unprepared in that way, they'll just think you're not taking it seriously. And yet you've gotten to this point, and there's going to be 3 or 4 other people competing with you. But if those other people have shown, oh yeah, I know all about, that you guys just hired Mike Pence, visiting professor. That's really interesting, right? That shows you're interested in the school. You've invested, you've done your research. That matters, right? As opposed to having no clue, what we're about and what we do. So, it's just things to think about as you go in the interview process and the job market. It's being prepared ahead of time will do you a whole lot of good when you actually get into the room with the people who are evaluating.
Further reason to be prepared is academics are notoriously ill-prepared interviewers. They will have glanced at your CV in a very cursory fashion. Not like 9 times out of 10, but like 5 times out of 10. And so often they will come to the interview unprepared to ask you questions. They won't look deeply enough to ask you about certain things. They just are not attentive enough. That will lead to awkward silences during the interview and often a missed opportunity for you to showcase what you really want to communicate about yourself. If you go in knowing more about the interviewer, right, you are the one who gets to start to drive the car. You're in the steering wheel, right? And you can actually say to them, because they'll ask you very early, do you have any questions for me? Because they've run out of questions for you. You should have ready 3 questions for every interviewer that you meet. And they can be about their research too, or they can be about the university. If this is someone who's been, who's an outgoing dean, talk about the 5-year vision for what where the university is going. If this is someone who just went through tenure, tell me a little bit about the tenure criteria and the experience you just went through. If this is someone who is an interesting subfield related to yours, I noticed an article, in your working paper list on this. Can you tell me a little bit more about it? It sounds fascinating. These are ways of actually filling time, demonstrating that you are other-centric, right? That you are concerned about your colleagues and you learn about them, and steering the conversation in such a way that it is showcasing your interests and what you're going to bring to the value.
Yeah, and to build on that, you should go in with 2 or 3 points you want to make about yourself. And even if they're asking you questions that are kind of off topic, you should always have a way to steer them back with, oh yeah, that reminds me of the fieldwork I did in country X, right? Because you want to highlight that. Oh yeah, that reminds me, I really love statistics, right? There were a couple things you always want to drive home, even if they're not asking you about it. Like, you have to find a way to drive the conversation to that, and in addition to the showing that you have an interest in and you have some knowledge about what they're doing. That's key.
Yeah, politicians do this very well. They'll be asked a very specific question and they'll say, I can't speak about that, but I'll tell you what I can speak about. And it's just always this kind of redirection. And in some ways, that's what you need to do as well. You need to be prepared that you don't want to leave the interview with this member of faculty without making sure that she knows this about you, because this is a soft spot for her. This is something she cares about deeply, is invested in. And actually, I used to do my research on the faculty. I would actually ask peers who knew them, like, what does this person care the most about? What are they looking for in candidates? I would want to know these things. I do this now for funders as well. I like to know, I want to be inside of their brains before I go and see them, so I know what to make sure I touch on. So the more you know, it's just intelligence. Do your reconnaissance in advance.
Well, I'm sorry that the tech issues took 10 minutes out. We've got maybe a minute for questions. So I don't know if anyone online has any questions or anyone in physical attendance.
Actually, I have a question. It's about one thing I picked up from this conversation is the importance of publications. And kind of like a way to, kind of like a low-hanging fruit here is actually to talk to a person who is also working on this and see an opportunity for co-authorship. And that could, easily expand your publications if that's what the game is all about. So I'd like to know how you build co-authorships over time in your career. What examples of kind of interactions that led to co-authorship?
Well, when you're starting out, you usually will be co-authoring with a more senior faculty person. And you want to make sure that that person acknowledges your contribution. Sometimes a senior faculty member will allow you to be first author if they think they're going to be more helpful to your career than mine at this point. So go for it. The other way you build co-authorship is with peers. You may have other PhD students that either in your program or maybe someone you met at research conference who's working in the same area. And if you think you can be more productive working together, sharing contributions and get more papers out, that works too. There used to be something of a fetish about sole authored papers. But I think that's diminished now because so many papers have so many authors now to get out. So if you co-author a paper with a senior faculty or with a peer, what matters is how good is that paper, where does it get published, and can you speak knowledgeably about that paper as a whole? So it's clear, I've been brought in just to do a little bit of it. No, you were a partner in developing the research plan, the data analysis, and you understand why the paper is important. And you can articulate that, doesn't matter if you have co-authors. So look at that as a way to get things done faster.
I want to be a little bit more brutal about this, about co-authors. I have strong opinion. They're my own, so it's not going to be shared necessarily by everyone, but just in personal experience. I have a pretty strong motor. I have found that co-authoring takes twice the time to get an article out. It should take half the time, but it often takes double the time.
It can happen, yes.
Right? It doesn't always happen that way. My best co-authors, it absolutely takes half the time. Tyler Rennie, my longtime political behavior.
Co-author with somebody who thinks like,
yes,
not who thinks very differently.
And the other key too is that it's someone who is a compliment to you, right? So I always co-author with really, really top-notch statisticians because I'm not a top-notch statistician. And so they are making up for my shortcomings with their methodological skills, and I'm bringing research design and field work into it, right? And I also often do a lot more writing, which is fine, right? We are working together, right? And that also really expedites the production. If I had to do the stats that my co-author Tyler does, it would take me quadruple the amount of time, and I probably wouldn't even do it half as well. So those are the ones that are really successful. Be wary of working with senior faculty, just writ large. Some are going to be generous, like Jack. Jack and I both in the last couple of years have co-authored with our grad students, and we give them top billing. Many faculty will not do that. Many faculty, and I'm not saying at Mason, I mean just general, they will be more exploitative of young PhD students. I actually, when I was a PhD student, I actually refused to work with senior faculty just after a lot of scary stories. So unless I knew from other PhD students that those faculty were generous and that they were recognizing other people's contributions, I didn't want to work with them. And I often found that when I did sometimes work with senior faculty, they asked me to do all of the work and then basically slap their name on it at the end. And it was, I didn't like it. I said I could just do this myself. And so I actually think that you want to be very selective about who you're working with, because it can take longer and be more aggravation and sometimes be unfair. And so I would be really selective on who you work with. It's not necessarily the shortcut that it sounds like. And in some cases, if you are able to author a good publication solo, there is still a bit of a fetishization of the solo author.
It certainly is fine, but
But it's not necessary.
yeah, you shouldn't feel that you're going to be penalized for being
Yes.
co-author.
Question about, in a similar vein with publication, there are oftentimes special editions or special issues with journals that some authors are running and they ask for submissions. One, are they as valuable as, say, you get an HSR article out on your own in their regular general admissions? And two, are there any specific sites that advertise these special issues, and how do we get to them?
Usually you have to be invited to submit for a special issue. And if it is a top quartile journal, it's going to count as a peer-reviewed article, even though the peer review process will be slightly different for a special issue. Now, you've edited special issues.
I have.
What's your take?
So one of the special issues, it was sort of facilitated, I would say, where you were given an advantage because you were going to be part of a special issue. The other one, it's truly pure, just normal peer review. So the higher ranking the journal, the more rigorous the peer review will be. In my personal opinion, APSR doesn't do special issues, as far as I'm concerned, as far as I know. But if they did, and you got into APSR on a special issue, you still have an APSR. Jen, you agree, right?
She had to leave.
Oh,
early.
there you go. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think Jen will agree, right? It's if you can get into a journal, if it's via special issue, it doesn't really matter, just do it. I wouldn't worry about it.
Let me say, there's one exception, I would say, to this idea that you really should have your work pretty well vetted and prepared before you submit to a journal. And that is not journals, but submitting to conferences, to the Midwest Political Science, American Political Science, APAM. You can submit work that is not quite as polished. And that's worth doing. It's worth getting on panels at professional meetings to try out your ideas, try out your work, meet other people on the panel, network with people in your field. A lot of my longest lasting friendships in the business are with people who I appeared on panels with early in my career, and we just, talked about the work we were doing, and we were brought together because we were on a panel at a professional meeting.
If I could leave you with one other small remark that directly related to what Jack just said. Gary King, the quantitative social scientist at Harvard, tells all of his PhD students, I was not one of them, but I worked with the students. He tells all of his students, every talk is a job talk. And what he means by that is every time you go in front of peers to present your work, you are being evaluated. They may not have a job to offer you right away, but if you do a great job, they will remember you.
Yeah.
If you do an awful job, they will remember you. Okay, and so you never really want to go in and half-ass it. Yes, the paper doesn't have to be polished, but you should be polished, and you should deliver in a way that demonstrates your competency and your preparation. You take it seriously. And to this day, I even with a job, I still treat every talk as a job talk.
Well, I want to thank you all for providing your expertise and feedback on the whole process. And everyone that was online, thank you for attending today. This was recorded. I'm hoping we can get it up probably by end of next week. I have to talk with my associate director, Brian Barr, to get him to do it. But thank you everyone for attending, and thank you for all of the wonderful feedback and expertise that you provided today. So
Yeah, thanks for organizing.